Robert Malley, former U.S. envoy for Iran and the architect of the 2015 Iran nuclear deal. Welcome to American Dialogues.
Thank you. An architect, not the architect, but I appreciate the elevation of my title.
Sure, a prominent one.
Promotion.
So I'll start with the nuclear deal, which effectively ended just a few days ago after 10 controversial years. How do you feel?
Listen, I mean, I haven't changed my view that it was a mistake from President Trump to withdraw from the deal. I'm aware of the criticism of the deal, including from some countries in the region. But to me, there's no doubt that the world was better off, including the region, including the United States, the country that I was representing, when the deal was in force and Iran was under strict inspections and under strict limitations of its nuclear program. I think we went through a very difficult period where Iran was expanding its nuclear program and we had less visibility in its program. Today, as a result of the war, again, I think the war was unnecessary. If the deal had been respected, Iran would have had a nuclear program that was well under surveillance and checked in terms of its nature. At the end of the war, we're in a period where, of course, Iran's nuclear program has been significantly degraded, no doubt about it. Where Iran is also probably has to be very reticent at the idea of reconstituting its program, given the fact that it's been so penetrated by Israeli intelligence. But clearly, the motivation of the regime to develop a bomb is higher than it was before, and the visibility into that program is less than it was before. And we still obviously don't know where the 400 kilograms of highly enriched uranium is, and again, the inspections are not present. So, all that being said, I think we would have been in a better position had the deal been respected by all sides, by the U.S., and then try to negotiate a follow-on deal that would be of extra benefit for both sides. The U.S. could have offered greater sanctions relief, and Iran could have agreed to extend the duration of the deal. And so, again, I look at it and I think it was an unnecessary, risky, and dangerous decision to withdraw from the deal.
So was President Obama concerned about balancing this pursuit of the nuclear deal with the maintaining of relations with Gulf states like Saudi Arabia, for example?
Yes. I mean, again, you and I are well aware of the difficulties that it created, particularly in the wake of the so-called Arab Spring and some of the tensions that caused between the United States and some of its traditional partners in the Gulf. He knew that this was not a deal that, to put it mildly, some countries in the Gulf were wild about or excited about. So he did feel like he felt that it was possible to maintain close ties to Saudi Arabia and UAE, which were the two countries that were two of the countries that were most opposed to the diplomacy that he was engaged in. But he felt that he could maintain those ties, even as he did what he thought was in the U.S. national interest. And ultimately, he was, as president of the United States, he felt that it was his duty to promote U.S. national security interests. A part of those national security interests were to maintain close ties with partners in the region. But the overwhelming imperative for U.S. national security was to make sure that Iran didn't acquire a bomb and try to optimally to achieve that goal without having to go to war. So that was his thinking. He understood that certain countries, some GCC members felt strongly that a nuclear deal alone was not enough, that you needed a deal that would also address regional issues, Iran's pursuit of a missile program, Iran's interference in the domestic affairs of different countries and support for non-state actors. Again, you know this better than I do, but it was also his conviction, I think shared by his team, that a deal that would address all those issues would take many, many, many years to achieve. Because once you start talking about Iran's regional posture, Iran would talk about America's regional posture. Once you talk about Iran's missile capacity, Iran would talk about the military capacity of its neighbors.
Yeah, correct. So with the return of sanctions on Iran now, how do you assess their impact? And do you fear that Iran has grown more skilled at evading those sanctions?
I think the sanctions have failed in their purported objective, which was to slow down Iran's nuclear program and to curb its regional activism. So I think the evidence, again, I may be biased in this, but the evidence from the period before the JCPOA, the nuclear deal, and the period after President Trump withdrew from the deal and he instituted a maximum pressure campaign, I think that evidence is pretty clear that it did not slow down Iran's nuclear program and it did not curb the sanctions, did not slow down its program and did not curb its regional activity. I think the sanctions were, they hurt elements of Iranian society, such as the middle class. I think studies have shown that as well. They did not really disempower the IRGC, the Revolutionary Guards, because they are the best equipped to circumvent the sanctions, as you're just hinting right now. So I think my view is that the sanctions regime, as it was, it puts pressure on Iran, no doubt about it. It contracts Iran's economy, no doubt about it. It doesn't achieve the political goals that its proponents claim it was designed to achieve. So, I think it's likely that the Revolutionary Guards, again, everyone suffers in Iran because of the sanctions, but the Revolutionary Guard, the elite, suffers less than the general population because they have ways of circumventing the sanctions that an ordinary Iranian simply doesn't have.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I think one of the things that distincts President Obama from Biden is that President Obama was very passionate about the Iran deal. Like he went all for it, and even if that would probably make some frictions between the U.S. and the Gulf and Israel, of course,
and frictions with many Democratic members of Congress. So this was frictions at home, frictions with the Gulf, and frictions with Israel, which showed how important the president felt that the deal was. That's right.
Yeah. But President Biden was different in that sense. I think you once said that you misread President Biden's intentions on reviving the Iran deal. What was the first sign that told you, no, he wasn't really committed?
I mean, so listen, every president is entitled to their policy. That's why they're president. I felt, based on things that the president, then candidate, senator or vice president, well, Senator Biden, well, no, at that point, I don't know, I guess he was the former vice president, had said throughout the campaign, which was that he believed that the maximum pressure campaign was a mistake, the withdrawal from the deal was a mistake, and he would try to come back into the deal. So my assumption was that soon after he took office, that would be one of the priorities. I think, as you say, and as you're quoting me, I think the president was lukewarm about the deal. He was not particularly enthusiastic about it.
And why do you think so? Why wasn't he very enthusiastic?
One should ask him. I think he felt, maybe he had some, I don't know if he had any qualms about the deal, but I do think that he felt, even though he was against the reimposition of sanctions by President Trump, I think he felt that now that the sanctions were there, why not take advantage of them to put more pressure on Iran to get a better deal? And it's when I heard the deal more to our benefit, and we have the leverage to do so because of these sanctions, which, of course, from the Iranian perspective, sounded like the Biden administration saying, America cheated by withdrawing from the deal, and now they want to take advantage of the fact that they cheated to extract more concessions from Iran. So I never really thought that approach would work. So I think pretty quickly it was clear that the president was not in a hurry, which is fine. Again, it's his prerogative. He didn't feel like that the U.S. should show any over-eagerness for the deal. And that, again, with the addition of the sanctions and another clue to the president's approach and to his top team, well, to some of his top advisors' approach, was that none of the sanctions that the Biden electoral team or campaign had denounced was lifted. All of the sanctions, including humanitarian sanctions, including the inability to send Iran any humanitarian assistance, including in the fight against COVID, none of that was lifted. I think the president felt it would be politically costly and it was not smart, because what we should do is take a firm posture and try to negotiate a deal with all the pressure being on Iran. didn't agree with that approach, but that was his approach.
Right.
And then at some point, I think there was a decision to try to get a deal that was not longer, stronger, that was more in line with the JCPOA. Was it too late at that point? Who knows? Certainly, we didn't achieve a deal. There was a new president in Iran, a new team, a more hardline team. I don't know. If you ask me now, do I think that if the United States had shown itself to be more willing to try to get a deal and more willing to, reinstitute the nuclear deal immediately or as soon as possible, would Iran have agreed to the terms of the deal? I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. So speaking from where I am today, I don't know whether the supreme leader was truly prepared to reach a deal when his experience was they had a deal and the Americans had cheated. The Iranians kept asking for guarantees that the U.S. would not withdraw a second time. And our answer was, we can't give you any guarantees. It doesn't exist in our constitutional system. So, we could do our best. And then at least you'd have 3 years where the nuclear-related sanctions would be lifted. And then you'd have to see who wins the next election. But I think they were clearly suspicious. And so, as I say, in hindsight, sitting where I am, I can't say with confidence that if the president had acted more sort of proactively to try to get a deal as early as February, March of 2021, I don't know whether it would have been possible. I think it would have been worth trying, but I'm not particularly confident that we could have reached a deal.
So in the summer of 2023, your security,
yeah.
So your security clearance was suddenly suspended or revoked, and looking back, suspended. So looking back, do you believe what happened? What happened there? Like,
honestly, I'm not hiding anything. I don't know.
Yeah.
They never told me. They said they were investigating, and then about a year, more than a year and a half later, they told my lawyers that they had closed the investigation. But they never told me what they were looking at. And again, I don't know. I didn't know then. I don't know now. I may never know.
What's your best guess?
I don't want to guess. It's pointless. What's the point of speculating? The one benefit of what happened was that I was not part of the administration after October 7th. And as I think I've made quite public that I have very considerable differences with the Biden administration in terms of how it dealt with the situation in the war in Gaza. And so, if I look at it in terms of how fate played out, I don't regret not having been part of the administration after October 7th.
Yeah. Do you think that you were made a scapegoat for this administration failure?
I think my father was Egyptian, so he was from the region. And he was very quick to believe in conspiracy theories.
Yeah.
I don't jump to those. I don't know. And so, at some point, maybe I'll know what happened. At this point, I'm just, I will be sort of blissfully ignorant. I don't know what happened. I don't know what they were looking at. And the fact that they closed investigation for me is good enough.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting that now.
Interesting. It was a Kafkaesque experience because not knowing what people are looking at is I don't wish that on anyone, but
yeah,
it is what it is, and I lived through it, and here I am, and as I say, I am grateful that I was not part of the administration at a time when they were pursuing a policy that I had very, very fundamental differences with.
I would just say that it's really interesting that now in the region, in the Middle East, and in the United States, in the UK too, conspiracy theories are thriving. So,
hey, I'm used to it. Again, I'm sure you've had your share. I try to stick to facts.
Yeah.
And I don't see the point of believing in conspiracies. Some conspiracies are very true. I have no doubt that there are many conspiracies in the world, but I wait to see evidence before I jump to conclusions, and sometimes the evidence is there.
So I hear you when you say that you felt better that you are away from this administration since it didn't act decisively on the war of Gaza. So, do you feel that President Biden has betrayed you and many of his supporters by failing to apply more pressure on Israel?
I mean, I don't look at it in terms of betrayal. I think, I mean, you wrote a piece on the book that Hussein Aga and I wrote, and we have something to say about the position of this administration. It's not a matter of he didn't betray me, he didn't owe me anything. I think it really is that it was
the voters.
Some of his supporters, again, some of his supporters probably approved of what he did. For me, it's more a matter of principle, which is, again, as we explain in the book, it is not tenable to say that you're working tirelessly for a ceasefire and that you care equally about the lives of Palestinians and Israelis, and at the same time continue to provide the weapons that ensure that there is no ceasefire and that the lives of Palestinians are going to be expendable. That, for me, it's a basic principle. It's not a matter of betrayal or not betrayal. I don't, it's a matter of policy and principle policy.
I think language matters too, and the way policies are condemned, because I feel that there were some resignations from the Biden administration and people who voiced their concerns, but there are also others who they're not very supportive of these policies, but they are not also vocal against them.
Yeah. So what is your question?
So where do you find yourself there?
I mean, again, I've said this before. I would like to think that I would have resigned because I think, listen, have you ever worked in government?
No.
Lucky you. Anyone who works in government will face moments, at least in the American system, I suspect it's true everywhere, where you have differences with your leadership. That's why they're president and I'm not. They have the right and the prerogative to conduct policy. And if I disagree, that's, who am I, right? I wasn't elected. I think there's some decisions that cross an ethical line, what I consider a normative moral line, that it's not a matter of I have a difference in tactics. And, I disagreed with many things that President Clinton did, that President Obama did. Some of them were important, some less so. I think in this case, it really is a matter for me of a fundamental principle that, we know now, but we've known it for some time, that an increasing number of experts on the Holocaust, experts on genocide, international organizations called what was happening, what Israel was doing in Gaza, a genocide. The use of famine as an instrument of war, the complete disregard of the number of innocent civilians that would be killed for the sake of killing one presumed member of Hamas, etc., etc., etc. And when you see all that and you continue to enable it through the provision of weapons, pressure, which is episodic, fleeting, and not particularly strong, I think you cross a line that for me, again, I'm speaking personally, I would like to think that I would have resigned because I don't think that's consistent with my image of what principles we should adhere to, what norms we should adhere to, and what the U.S. should do. Yeah. And so, that's my position, and I think it is something everyone who serves has to make a decision for themselves, and based on their own. There's so many considerations that come into play. For me, this was almost as close to a black and white issue as I can recall. Again, I just don't understand. I'd understand. But it is kinds of things that President Biden himself and other officials were saying about their desire, eagerness, desperation for a ceasefire, and not do what it would take to get a ceasefire. I just don't. There's no justification for that. So that's my position, and it's clear as it can be.
You studied with Blinken in France in the past. So did you find that yourself, disagreeing a lot on policy with him in your time there?
So could I tell the story in the book, and by the way, I hope that the book can be translated into Arabic, and maybe you have some ideas on that.
I skimmed through, and I read some reviews, but I've heard a lot about it. And I will ask you also about the book, of course.
I hope you read it because you wrote something about it. But anyway, So yes, I did go to school with Anthony Blinken. I don't like personalizing too much. Of course, I disagree because he was instrumental in the policy that I just described. So there's no there's no secret that I disagree with that policy of which he was a part. So we knew each other back in I think we met in 1975, maybe. As I say in the book, the one and only debate that I recall having in all my high school years was a debate with him, in which we debated the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. I think that was in 1979, and just he represented the Israeli view, I represented the Palestinian view, and I think that was sort
a good practice.
It was somewhat practice, yes. As I've said, both of us were young. Neither one of us knew much about the topic. Both of us probably made fools of ourselves in terms of what we said, but we thought we were fighting the good fight, each on our own side.
So moving to your new book, Tomorrow is Yesterday, you revisit the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and your role in Camp David talks. For years, the dominant narrative blamed Yasser Arafat for a historic mistake. But you've argued that Ehud Barak, Bill Clinton, Arafat himself all share blame. Tell me about that moment. What did you witness up close during those negotiations?
Well, first, I want to explain why Hussein and I felt that it was important to revisit this episode. As we write in the book, the first use that people had made of the failure of Camp David and blaming Arafat exclusively for the failure was to demonize not just Yasser Arafat, not just the Palestinian leadership, not just the Palestinian movement, but in the words of some, the entire Palestinian people as being incompatible or inimical to peace, wanting the destruction of Israel. That the whole idea was you go to the summit, it fails, then you launch the second Intifada. So already the dominant narrative, the Orthodox American narrative about Camp David in 2000 when the summit failed, was instrumentalized to do a lot of harm to the Palestinian people. And again, we recount how the uses that were made of that moment. More recently, after October 7th, and this really to our dismay, some Americans made use of they resurfaced, unearthed the failure of Camp David to make the case that it's the Palestinians' fault. If they had agreed to the deal in 2000, then we wouldn't be where we are today. They would have their state. And in a way, they were saying, how can they complain today about what's happening in Gaza when everything could have been avoided if they had simply had Camp David in 2000? Camp David, even though it happened a quarter of a century ago, even though today not a single Israeli senior official believes in a two-state solution. In fact, the vast majority of the Knesset has voted against a two-state solution. That today we're still some people are still turning back the clock 25 years and to say it's all the Palestinians' fault. They're the reason why this horrendous situation exists. So we did feel, even though it is a quarter of a century ago, even though the situation today has nothing to do with what we faced in 2000, as I just said, we know the Israeli position. It is clearly opposed to the establishment of a Palestinian state, that still people want to use Camp David as the answer to all the complaints about Israeli policy. And so what we explain is, yes, we don't say that everything the Palestinians did was right. We criticize the Palestinian leadership for not having had a more proactive position, for not having come up in a way to be able to deal with President Clinton and Ehud Barak in a more creative way that might have served their interests more. But the notion that this was all a ploy and that Arafat was never interested in peace, never believed in a two-state solution, and that this was evidence of that, when the circumstances at Camp David were almost designed to alienate him. I mean, I don't want to go through the whole history. People could hopefully read the book, but let's not forget, when Ehud Barak is elected, the first thing he does is he decides to renegotiate the deal that Benjamin Netanyahu, who had been prime minister and who Ehud Barak defeated in the elections, to become prime minister. He renegotiated. He said he had to renegotiate the deal and was not prepared to withdraw from some parts of the West Bank that Prime Minister Netanyahu had agreed to withdraw from. He continues to enable the construction of settlements on West Bank territory. In other words, saying that you want to reach peace, but continuing to swallow more of the land that is supposed to be negotiated as part of the peace deal. Ignores the Palestinians by focusing on a deal with Syria, and for months chases a Syria deal and ignores the Palestinians. So from Arafat and the Palestinian leadership and the Palestinian people's perspective, here's somebody who claims he wants peace, does everything to hurt Palestinians, including settlement construction, including not withdrawing from more territory in the West Bank, including by ignoring any peace negotiations with the Palestinians for the sake of negotiating with Syria. And then when the negotiations with Syria fail, almost overnight decides now is the time we're going to quickly pivot to the Palestinian case, and we're going to give them a few weeks where they have to decide either they accept our offer or they're going to be sort of ostracized, made pariahs, and suffer the consequences of their rejection. So that's the mentality. Again, people could say, well, that's psychology, but psychology matters. It matters to everyone. It matters no less to the Palestinians than it matters to the Israelis. So the whole circumstances of the summit, a do-or-die summit in which Arafat was convinced, and again, not just him, the Palestinian population, public opinion, that this was a trap. You speak of conspiracy. We spoke of conspiracies earlier. They were convinced this was an Israeli-American conspiracy to present them with an unacceptable offer and then tell them, either you accept this offer or you're going to be suffering. That was how Yasser Arafat heard it. He didn't hear, as much as maybe outsiders did, some of the concessions that Ehud Barak was prepared to make, more than any of his predecessors. But again, from the Palestinian point of view, it was not enough. I think Arafat felt, if I accept this, I don't know what I'm getting in return. I don't know because they're not describing it. I know what historic concessions I will have made on top of the historic concession I already made. I'm going to be viewed as a quisling, as a traitor, as somebody who was not loyal to the Palestinian cause. And he smelled, rightly or wrongly, a trap, a conspiracy. So, when we say, and then, we also speak about the American role, which very unlike what President Carter had done decades earlier at his Camp David, where the U.S. had a proposal. It put it to the two parties. If either party had a problem, it tried to modify it a bit, always keeping the pen, control of the process, and control of the paper. Under President Clinton, he put a paper on the table. Ehud Barak didn't like it. Arafat didn't like it either. And President Clinton said, that's it, no more paper. We're going to just talk to the two sides. And basically what the U.S. ended up doing, and I say this self-critically because I was part of the American team, is we became messengers. We took Israeli proposals, we gave them to the Palestinians. The Palestinians said not good enough. We went back to the Israelis, we took another proposal. What's the point of being a superpower? You could ask your mailman and they would do as good a job. So again, I say this emphasizing that I do think the Palestinians could have played a more proactive role where they could have been more willing to put ideas on the table, more willing to do what the Israelis do very well, which is to say yes, but, rather than no, but. So say yes, but, and then you come back with your own proposal. But our conclusion is all sides misplayed, and in many ways, Camp David became a microcosm of the Israeli-Palestinian relationship as a whole, in which the Israelis feel we won the war. We won not just one war, but several. We won in 48, we won in 67, we won, we expelled the Palestinians from Beirut, and yet we are doing what no country would ever do. We win a war, and yet we're prepared to turn over the land to the party that lost the war. So from their perspective, anything they offered the Palestinians was a gift. And just listen to their rhetoric, generous offer. They make the offer, it's generous. Of course, as you know, the Palestinian perspective is very different. They feel like they were stolen, that the land was stolen in 1948 first it was stolen by the Brits, then by this international, but it wasn't a representative UN because most of the countries of the global South were not represented yet in the UN. So they felt that they were being told, we're taking the land away from you without any justification. And they were the ones who had made the major compromise by saying we're prepared to live on the borders of 1967, as long as the rights of the refugees are respected. So a clash of visions, of competing narratives, of competing mindsets, aspirations, and they never met. They were never close to a deal at Camp David. And what we say, in Hussein and I say in the book, and Hussein says it with the benefit of having been present at almost every serious negotiation between Israelis and Palestinians from, the 1960s or 70s or 80s onwards. And I say from the benefit of having advised several U.S. administrations, is that, there were these massive talking past each other between Israelis and Palestinians, and Americans were, at best, feckless interpreters who sided more with the stronger side of the two, the Israelis. And ultimately, one of our conclusions is that the two-state solution, as it was defined in the Oslo process, was not really the solution that either Israelis or Palestinians were naturally inclined towards, and it would have taken a much more adept hand by the U.S. and by others to get them to agree, and that never happened. So that's, I gave you a bigger, longer answer, but I give you the answer for that reason.
So, what was President Clinton's reaction after the talks collapsed? I'm asking that because I think story matters. When
listen,
you walk us, through that would be great, I think, too.
So, listen, I would tell you, he felt very strongly, and he said it, but he said it to us, that he was, maybe betrayed is too strong a word, but it was a word that he used at the beginning of our interview, betrayed by the Palestinians, where he felt were never serious at Camp David, that they came to stick to their position and say no and then leave. And I think he felt that they didn't seriously negotiate. And he had a big fight with Abu Allah, who was one of the main Palestinian officials at the time, over this. Now, again, as we say in the book, I think that was a genuine feeling on the president's part. I think it was a feeling that showed was not particularly sympathetic to the Palestinians, because I don't think he had internalized their narrative and why they felt that they were making concessions, that they were being forthcoming. They had been forthcoming since 1988, when they'd accepted, as they say, the 67 borders, a two-state solution. So I think he felt that, which is why he did something which we describe in the book, which is, even though he had told Chairman Arafat before Camp David, because let's not forget, Arafat did not want to go to Camp David.
Yeah.
He begged both President Clinton in a meeting, on a phone call that I attended, and a meeting with Secretary of State Albright. He begged her, let's not go to Camp David. Camp David will result in a fiasco. It will explode in our faces. We can't afford an explosion in our faces. But he was told, we will go. You will not be blamed if it fails. And whether it succeeds or fails, Ehud Barak has committed that he would undertake that redeployment of Israeli troops that Prime Minister Netanyahu had agreed to, and that Prime Minister Barak had reneged on. And yet, what happens? Almost immediately after the failure of Camp David, the president blames Arafat. And what he said, again, just so you know his point of view, was, when I said I wouldn't blame him, it was under the assumption that Arafat would negotiate in good faith. I don't believe he negotiated in good faith. That was his view. Again, I disagreed, but that was, again, presidents have the right to make those decisions. I personally disagreed with that. I don't think it was faithful to the promise that had been made to Arafat. But even more important, I don't think that it was good for the process. How does it help? If you want to preserve a chance, Camp David was not the end of the road, in my view, And so if you want to preserve a chance of renewed negotiations, you don't demonize and discredit and delegitimize one of the two parties in the negotiations by saying that he was at fault and the other side was not. So that was done in part because Ehud Barak, and this was a conversation Ehud Barak had with President Clinton, in which he said, I'm so exposed domestically. In the polls, he was doing terribly, and elections were about to occur. He looked in Israeli eyes like a fool that he'd agreed to make all these concessions, which for Israelis were large historic concessions, and he got nothing in exchange. In fact, soon thereafter, he had got nothing in exchange. And so he told the president, you need to support me. You need to make public the fact that I was your partner I made the historic decisions, and Arafat is responsible for the failure of the summit. He felt he needed that, and I think President Clinton felt that he owed it to Ehud Barak because of the courage that he had shown to show that support. Again, I understand that. I think it was oblivious to what was happening on the Palestinian side, and the U.S. does have this tendency to be overly sensitive to Israeli politics and insufficiently sensitive to Palestinian politics.
Yeah, so you wrote in the book, the absence of a state wasn't the cause of all Palestinians' misfortunes, and its creation wouldn't be the full solution either. That's pretty grim. So what's the
alternative? You say it's grim. I'm not sure it's grim. It's, if people misdiagnose a problem, right? If you have a medical problem and I misdiagnose it, it's grim in the sense that you've wasted a lot of time. It's not grim in terms of the saying that there's no other solution, there's no other remedy. It's just that, as we say, the way the two-state solution has been defined, which is a hard partition between two states in a very Western model, the Westphalian model of, we divide states, ethnic or in this case also religious identity, that effort has failed. I think, again, shouldn't be a controversial statement to say that. What is more controversial, and which we don't pronounce ourselves on, is then what? What should the alternative be? But there are different modes of relations between entities that are not as rigid as a hard partition. And one of the problems, core problem of the two-state solution as it's been defined, and this is what Hussein and I argue in the book, proponents of a two-state solution, I respect a number of them because a lot of them are still believe in a two-state solution for good faith reasons. For other people, it's bad faith, but for a lot of people, it's in good faith. I believe, many people who are behind the effort of the kingdom say because they believe that it's the only solution they could imagine. But what do they have an answer to the fact that you have over 700,000 Jewish settlers in the West Bank and Jerusalem today? What are they going to do with them? That's just one piece. There's so many other pieces. What answer do they give to the millions of Palestinian refugees who have an aspiration, a yearning to their land, and it's not something that you could simply extinguish like that? Mm-hmm. What's the answer to them? So there is a Palestinian national identity. There's a Zionist identity movement. And those are very hard to divide and say, here's the border, here's one, here's the other, when those identities are much more all-encompassing. Mm-hmm. So what we say is we have to be more creative, and there's some Israelis and Palestinians who are already thinking along these lines of a more nuanced, elastic view of sovereignty that would perhaps accommodate the national aspirations both of Israeli Jews and of Palestinians. That's the challenge that we throw to people who are going to read the book, to say, okay, if the two-state solution as we defined it has failed, and it's failed because of so many reasons. The role of the U.S. is one, but also who were the parties who were involved in negotiations. Some of the most dynamic parties in Israel and the Palestinians were excluded. The goal that was being pursued, the way it was being pursued. If that effort as a whole has failed, and has failed dramatically, because it's led us to where we are today, with Gaza, which, as an American official said, looks like several nuclear bombs has fallen on it, right? The level of distrust between Israelis and Palestinians at an all-time high. The facts on the ground where you have, settlement construction, as I say, which is at an all-time high, which makes it virtually impossible to imagine how you're going to untangle Israelis and Palestinians. If that's the situation that the 30 years of this peace process and more, if you go back to the origins of the idea of partition, then at least the least we can do is say, okay, let's take a step back. Let's make sure that the slaughter in Gaza ends, right? And we may be on our way, to have something more sustainable there. And then let's take a deep breath and say, okay, what went wrong? What has been the reasons why we are where we are today? Rather than rush head on and simply say, two states, and not take a step back and say, let's look what went wrong. Maybe they'll end up with two states again. Yeah. But let's learn the lessons of the past. Let's not simply be stubborn and lazy.
I think you described the Trump method and approach to the Gaza war as raw politics. I think if they would stick to that, they probably, do something.
I mean, this is an era, and particularly with President Trump, and we've said it a little bit in the book. We've said it more in articles that we've published in the last couple of weeks. There's many aspects of President Trump's policy that I strongly disagree with. In his first term, he clearly was putting his thumb on the scale in favor of the Israelis in so many ways, recognizing Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, the annexation of the Golan Heights, a peace to prosperity plan that deprived Palestinians of 30% of the West Bank, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So there's no doubt that you have in the Trump administration's team officials who are very much biased on Israel's side. But having said all that, he shows the possibility of what a unorthodox method of politics, a more direct exercise of U.S. power on all sides, a willingness to work with countries in the region and to have them play an important role, Turkey and Qatar, but others as well, a willingness to speak directly to Hamas, which is unprecedented in the annals of American diplomacy. And so, here's somebody who may be able to move things. Again, I'm not predicting, because on the same day that he speaks about understanding Hamas, he also says that he's going to eradicate them. On the same day that he says that that Hamas has not violated the ceasefire, he threatens them. So it's very unclear. He's a bit all over the map. But he does believe in achieving results. He does believe in politics. In raw politics, as you quote us, in power politics. And so, I think this is something that the kingdom, but other countries in the region need to fully absorb in terms of how to deal with him. So, he achieved a ceasefire that his predecessor was unable to achieve. And I think we have to give him credit for that, even though the ceasefire is extremely fragile, even though there's full of ambiguity and vagueness and loopholes. The Gazans today are living better. They're not living well, but they're living better than they did prior to the ceasefire.
Rob, I will conclude with one question, and
Okay.
I really appreciate your time. So after everything, Iran deal, Camp David, Gaza, what is the biggest illusion about American power in the Middle East? Once believed and now no longer exists.
I believe that I think the world sees as an illusion of American power.
Let's do both.
No, I only have a few minutes. That could take a very long time. But I do listen. I think there is. I believe that many people outside of the U.S. and particularly in the Arab world, because I've traveled there a lot and spoken to people, they have sort of this vision of. Well, they had this vision of the U.S. being all powerful, that they're pulling the strings all over in the region. Part of the conspiratorial mindset sometimes of believing that the U.S. is behind everything, and not recognizing two things. One, that the U.S. has proven time and time again that it doesn't have the ability to control events, as we describe in the book.
Yes.
Think of everything that's happened over the last several decades that the U.S. had a strong hand in, and then ended up being. The outcome was completely the opposite, whether it's what happened in Afghanistan, what happened in Iraq, what happened with Iran, what happened with the Arab Spring. I mean, what happened with Syria. Whenever they try to do one thing and then it doesn't happen, and then it happens for reasons that have nothing to do with the U.S. So I think it really would be a mistake, to view the U.S. as being all that powerful and behind everything. But secondly, underestimate the leverage that, in this case, since I'm speaking to an Arab audience, that the Arab world has. I mean, the Arab world can do things to try to influence U.S. policy. I've said the same thing when I speak to Europeans, and I say this as an American. Obviously, you'd like America to not be as subject to pressure from others, but both the Europeans and right now, I think the Arab world has a strong ability to influence U.S. policy, because there's things that this administration wants from its Arab partners. So. Don't overestimate U.S. power and don't underestimate your leverage, because that's a recipe for throwing your hands up in the air and saying there's nothing we can do, and criticizing the U.S. but not trying to influence it. So you could criticize them, but understand that not everything is by design by the U.S. A lot of it is a sign of American weakness rather than of strength. And there are ways of shaping, influencing U.S. policy that I think are not always appreciated.